Hello, my name is Rob Simpson and welcome to Directors Uncut. If this is your first episode, we put filmmakers from all corners of the globe onto a huge list that covers everything from the master of suspense to the masters of horror. And then we turn it into a lottery of directors, and by using a random number generator we pick a name out of the hat. Whatever name comes out, myself and some guest hosts discuss them and their work through 2 films. This week again it's another cutting from the Patreon. I think we've got one more of these to go and then it'll be back to the last recording, and the last fresh recording, which we'll, be pushing through weekly until the end of the season. But this one, it's Patreon. Let's not dilly-dally any further and introduce who we are joined by this week.
Hi, I'm Graham Williamson.
And I'm also another Rob, the other Rob who's normally found with that Rob that you were just speaking to on things like Impossible Mission. I also go by the name of pRob and sometimes by the name of A.K.A as well.
Indeed.
You're cheating on the A.K.As, frankly. Most
as you
people
grow older,
one.
No, as you grow older, you tend to gather names in the way that, most people gather other things.
Do you?
It's a thing that can happen. You yourself, Graham, probably have several nicknames.
What was the phrase in My Name is Dolomite? A repository of American folklore.
Yes, yeah.
So that's what you're saying.
A repository.
A repository of English folklore. Is that what you're suggesting, Rob?
No, I'm not a repository of English folklore. Far from it. I mean, do I look like anything from the Smith legends or anything like that?
You can say that. I think of it as the Smiths with Morrissey and,
Will and Smith, I am not. Will and Smithers, I am not.
It's true, as you grow older, you do gather nicknames, particularly if you are an internationally prominent jewel thief.
Well, yes, there is that.
Hang on. Now you're ascribing stuff to me that I have no involvement in whatsoever. So, FBI, do not look for me. Oh, did I just deny that a bit too hard?
No. FBI, by all means, FBI, pay for our Patreon podcasts because, we're not one to turn away money from wherever it comes from because, honestly, that's not the world we live in.
Maybe that's the secret. Maybe we should hint that we're involved in major crimes more often.
Well, it was open the show by asking how everybody was, but Rob's kind of turned this into some sort of deeply suggestive secret society.
I was just worried maybe I denied being an international jewel thief a bit too hard there.
Yeah. So here's the hard question, because there's 2 very, very different answers I'm going to get here. There's going to be the Graham answer, and there's going to be the Rob essay. So,
which is different to the knob.
Yes, it is. Exposure to Makoto Shinkai. He came out as our director of the month.
Please use a different word.
Well, what other word should I use? Experience sounds even worse. What experience have you with Makoto
Yeah, now
Shinkai?
you've brought it into this territory. It's not going to go without a fight.
What have you seen from him? I think that's about as delicately put as I could probably manage.
Well, obviously, I'm an anime expert. My main experience with the anime form is that still that's up in the lo-fi hip-hop beats to study to YouTube channel. So, yeah.
Oh, that's an obscure pull.
If you get it, you'll get it.
I wonder how many people actually see that.
It's actually it's really good for writing too. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know jack shit about anime.
What's held you off from anime, though, honestly?
I think it's just one of those things where the field is so huge I've never known where to take the plunge. And I have had some handy hints. Several people, not least pRob, A.K.A. Archean, A.K.A. the Leopard, has...
The what?
Yeah.
Am I just going to gather names during this
Focus, Rob. Focus.
Pretend you don't know about it. But yes, several people have recommended Satoshi Kon to me. I have seen a fair bit of Satoshi Kon's stuff and enjoyed it greatly. But like I say, there is so much anime, and it is talked about in tones of such scholarly expertise that I find it very intimidating, just grabbing something off the shelf.
Well, it's like saying, have you ever watched a Hollywood movie? It's that sort of vast of a catalogue of things. Where do you start with a Hollywood movie? It's impossible.
Exactly, yes.
So, the inverse of that question. Graham, you don't know anime. Rob, Makoto Shinkai, hit me.
Seen everything, babe. It's difficult to put me in a position where you can talk about an anime director whose stuff I haven't seen, considering I've been wallowing in animation since about the age of 5 and never really left.
Okay.
And when I say wallowing, I mean you know those images of hippos and pigs and elephants just wallowing in mud. That's literally me when it comes to animation, just kind of just rolling around in it like a big fat manatee on dry land.
I've got to sort of add my take, because you've given me sort of a perfect segue there. I used to really be into anime until I realised what the fandom was, and draw a line from what Rob just said to what I just said. And, I think it was when I went to my first anime convention where I thought, hang on, no, I don't like anime. I don't want anything to do with this. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, if you notice, I said animation. I didn't say anime.
Okay, that's true.
And
very different things.
I have to say there is a very distinct reason why I use the term animation, and it is a little bit of it is based on what Rob has said. The community has moved on a lot since I was a kid, and it's fun to be an anime fan when you're a teenager and when you're in your early 20s. That's when all the fun is, But when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, that was also a time when anime wasn't readily available on the international market. We had, it was VHS era. We had to share our copies of VHS tapes and stuff like that, and we really struggled for actual things to watch.
So you're on the tapes sharing scene for anime. That's as alpha hipster as humanly possible.
See, you call it alpha hipster now, but back then we were just fans. We didn't even know what the term...
I know. I'm just teasing.
To us, hipsters were a type of jeans that only the trendy people really wore.
Now you're showing your age there, Rob. You really are.
When I was a lad.
The day a star fell. It was almost like
seeing something out of a dream. Nothing more or less than a breathtaking view.
We're going to take a bit of a change in trend. Usually we'd start off with the lesser known, the earlier, the more obscure, delete as applicable, and then build up to the one that they're mostly known for. Whereas this time, we're flipping it on its head. Now we are going to be doing Makoto Shinkai's international breakout, I think it's fair to say, 2016's, was it Oscar winning? Am I right to call it Oscar winning? I feel like it was.
Ooh, let me have a look.
I don't think it won an Oscar.
It got a lot of award contention. It broke through the mainstream in a lot of ways. Matt Komoda's a big fan of it.
Here is my favourite statistic that I found when I was researching this. 10% of the 2016 box office revenue in Japan was just this film.
That's beyond success, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's also the highest grossing anime movie of all time. It overtook Spirited Away.
Right.
So
yes.
I don't think it won an Oscar, though. I think it was nominated, but it was beaten...
Probably the Pixar movie of the year. There seems to
just not that the Oscars are predictable in this category, but they are predictable in this category.
So, who wants to synopsize this? Because this is probably the easier of the two to sum up.
Yeah, so it is the easier of the two to sum up, and I'm still not sure if I can do it, but I'm going to have a valiant go. There is a girl called Mitsusha, a high school girl living in rural Japan. She has a dream that in her next life she'll be a boy from the big city, from Tokyo. And then as soon as she dreams this, she starts to occasionally switch bodies with a kid in Tokyo called Taki. And at first she thinks it's a dream, and he thinks it's a dream too, because he's experiencing this as well from the other end of the telescope. But they discover that it's real, and it has something to do with a comet.
That's about as good a synopsis as you could get for such a twisty thing.
Yeah.
It is very twisty.
Her name is Mitsuha, not Mitsusha.
Oh, right, yeah, fair enough. That's going to happen a lot, listeners.
Don't worry, I am here to correct you. It's fine.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to ask you this first, Graham, but being sort of new at anime, but what did you think of it? Because it is possibly the most straight down the line anime you've probably seen.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, when you say straight down the line, I guess you mean defining what I don't mean this pejoratively, but what the mainstream of the form is, that it's not some sort of marginal art house anime. This is big blockbuster anime.
All right, this could easily be a mainstream movie with very little alteration.
Yeah.
It could. And there were parts of it that I found hugely impressive. I think one of the things that interests me about anime when I watch it is that you are sort of looking at maybe what Western animation would be like in a parallel universe where 2D hadn't been sort of fighting for its survival for the past 2 decades or so. And there are a lot of scenes in this where you have 3D camera movements and little subtle bits of CGI, but not used in an ostentatious way, just used to deepen the sense of this environment as being a real place. And I think the great triumph of the film is that it absolutely does feel like a real place. It's very easy to forget that you're watching an animated film, particularly in the more landscape-based scenes.
Yeah, that's kind of at the heart of what I really like about anime now, those rural bits. Because it's the slow pace and the sense of character that you get in the small rural area. It's just, like you said, it's a different sense of pace, a different sense of time. It just feels completely different to where we are in the world, and it feels truly Japanese. I think I watched another one recently, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. It has a similar feel, that rural Japaneseness. And it's just, I don't think movies really capture it in the same way, like mainstream live-action movies.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I suppose because part of the promise of filmmaking in general is that you see the world through someone else's eyes, and that is literally true in the case of Shinkai, because I've watched some videos which explain how he does these backgrounds and how closely they're based on real locations in Japan, but at the same time, you're not seeing them as they are, you're seeing them as they are drawn and animated by him. So it's a very pure kind of cinematic fantasy. It's about being able to see what he sees when he looks at the world.
Rob, what did you think of Your Name?
Which name? He has several.
This is going to be awkward for this movie, isn't it?
Teed it up.
Yes, you did. There's elderly leopard jokes going on in my head now. So, Your Name, I liked, but for me, I look at Your Name in the context of Shinkai's works in general. And for me, Your Name, as great it was in terms of production, it kind of lacked a little bit of shine in terms of the actual content. I thought that, yes, it jumps around in time and stuff like that, and the story is a little bit convoluted because of the perspective shifting from Taki to Mitsuha and the body swapping aspect, which is a weird, very, very Japanese take on Freaky Friday. And
true.
So, you know, that whole idea I really like, but I also understood some of the context behind what was going on. And so I thought it was, because there is some, I can't remember whether it was Buddhism or Shintoism in there. I think it's Buddhism in there to do with the whole thing with the union of relationships. The whole thing with braids, for example, is a metaphor for a lot of other things, especially ties you have to the things around you.
What is she, Mitsuha, the priest?
She's the shrine maiden.
That's the word, yeah. That's a pretty Shintoist thing, isn't it?
Well, it's a Buddhist thing and a Shintoist thing.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Mr. I know religions and paid attention
in Japan, it's a Buddhist thing and a Shintoist thing.
Okay.
So yeah, there's that whole aspect to it, and So I'm looking at it, but I've seen Weathering with You as well, which is a more recent example of, and I think as I've watched Shinkai's movies progress, you can see more and more influences of Shintoism and Buddhism in his films. And I think Your Name was it very much wore its heart on its sleeve in terms of the religious references. It's not saying that one religion is better than the other or anything like that. Simply using that religion, kind of an idea of that religion as a storytelling framework. And I think that's something that I really like about his work, but I think it's also been done better in other films that he's done.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, one thing I really like, I mean, I don't watch a lot of anime, as I've alluded to, but it's this body swapping thing, which is quite common recently.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of people use that, and they're quite pervy with it.
Yes.
Very pervy. It doesn't really need the blanks filling in, to be honest. But what I liked about it is it was done from the perspective of somebody being a little bit more mature in the way to tell a story. So you get to see Japan... How can I word this? Japan is very male society.
Yeah.
So you get to see a woman's perspective of that male society and vice versa. So, do you see what? It's kind of hard to explain because there's so many slips and flops.
I know what you... Yeah. And I think that is part of the pleasure of... I guess body swapping is kind of a genre, isn't it? I mean, it is and it isn't. It's part of the pleasure of it. The thing that I thought... was a bit hard for me to take, and I was interested when you said that this is an element, an ingredient that's been in a lot of anime recently. But I realised when I was watching it that part of the pleasure of body swapping movies for me is acting, is watching people physically imitate another actor's persona and movement, and that obviously that is something that does not come through in the same way in animation. The figures are beautifully animated. They have character, but it can't be the same as watching an actor do this, which I've decided after watching this is where the real joy of body swapping as a trope is for me.
Yeah, I know one of the things that that happened when Your Name came out, there was an anime series that came out that was about body swapping called Kokoro Connect or Heart Connect. And the problem that you had was that you had Your Name with its version of body swapping, but then you had Kokoro Connect with its version of it was more soul swapping than body swapping in all of them. And Kokoro Connect kind of examined it from a more extreme perspective where people would switch bodies, but then they'd switch into other people's bodies, and then switch again into a completely different person's body, and someone else was basically being the puppet master for all of that. So they were under someone else's control, and that the whole thing was them having to struggle to come to terms with how they're going to get back into their own bodies. Whereas Your Name was approaching it from a more passive perspective. It was something that simply happened, and they just had to deal with it. And
I wouldn't
they'd
say
eventually go back into their own body.
I think it's using the body swap as a mystery mechanic.
Yeah, why is it happening? Well,
no, not that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's why is it happening, which is kind of common with a lot of these things. They eventually figure it out in this or that. More in the way of how it leads up to the third act.
Oh, yes.
When it introduces time travel and when they try to stop a certain event happening with the perspective of somebody from the future, effectively.
Yeah.
And the mystery mechanics there, trying to figure out how to get and how to get back and how to solve the situation and how to save somebody, which isn't so common.
Yeah, but that's when you get into the religious side of things. It's to do with the what was it? I forgot what they call it. The spit wine, let's call it that. And the whole religious proceedings that go on to the stone leading to the underworld and the shrine in there, and the wine that they've made from chewing grains of rice and spitting it back out.
It's a very different cultural context, but the emotional core of it is basically, would you stop a disaster from happening, which is an absolutely universal fantasy.
Yeah. Visually, though, I think that's where it won a lot of its plaudits.
Yes, absolutely. Especially
in the sequences with the meteor passing overhead.
Yeah, the comet is a stunning thing to see. Shinkai's been noted for his views, these panoramas he does in his works.
Yeah.
One of the more famous ones is the sight of the planet rising above the horizon in 5 centimeters per second. It's part of a dream sequence. And that was, for a long time, was a very, very famous one. Even now, it still gets cited in a lot of anime circles. And, the comet in Your Name is now the most famous one in terms of the general public. But he always has these vistas that he wants to show people in all of his movies. He always has this he always wants people to see just how expansive this world he's created is and how small the characters in his world are.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. And I think that ties back into the emotional context of it, feeling like you're just helplessly part of something really big and that you don't quite understand. I do think those landscapes are gorgeous. I think the stuff with the lake in the middle is staggering, in part because what he's trying to do is use the grammar of live action film in a way that sort of serves an animation. And I think we'll talk about this a bit more in the second film, but that is really fascinating to me. That shows how, filmmaking grammar, the nuts and bolts of it, has now entered our consciousness so thoroughly over the last 120 years that you would think it was weird if you saw it not being done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about animation these days, you can't really look at animation in general, especially animated feature films, without looking at it from a filmmaking perspective.
Yeah.
And yes, animation is kind of its own medium in a way, but a lot of the nuts and bolts, as you say, they cross from live action filmmaking to animation in a way that doesn't really happen in a lot of other media. You can't, if you're a talented writer, that doesn't automatically make you a talented painter.
Yeah,
for example.
Because animation is basically filmmaking without a camera, and there's no reason why an animation should have to behave as though the frame is captured on camera, but it often does, and I think those moments are really some of the most beautiful ones for me.
Yeah, going back to the body swap thing, I do think there is room for the acting to be sort of behaving like the other person.
Yeah.
It's because, for example, the Mitsuha speaks very masculine. It completely changes her mannerisms and the way she speaks, and I think at some point one of the characters says you developed an accent, or vice versa. So it probably works better in Japanese, because in the subtitles there's one bit where feminine pronouns, I think other languages have that. I think Spanish has that as well.
Yeah.
Where it's not saying I in the feminine, even though it's a guy, and there's a sort of language stuff going on there, which is very unique to anime, and the way they sort of speak with a feminine voice or with a masculine voice, and sort of little changes there, we can tell the difference. Which the playing of that later on in the movie where it says, hang on, you're not Mitsuha, who are you? Because of the way she expresses herself and language. I don't know if it translates so much in the English version, but in the Japanese version, definitely there.
Well, you're actually onto a very good point, and I was going to mention this in a bit, but you brought it up now, so well. It very much depends on which dub you actually watch. If you watch the English dub, then you kind of lose about a third of kind of the underlying context in terms of the dialogue, because of the fact that the English language does not split male, female, and neutral, and does not have a gender for I or me or my or anything like that. Whereas in Japan, you not only do you have a gender for I and me and my, you also have a kind of age for it as well. So if you are a young boy, for example, you would say boku. If you are an older boy, a teenage boy, you would say ore, for example. And so that also plays a part in how you identify, the age of a character and the gender of a character. And that plays into, when you do listen to the Japanese version of this, that plays into a lot of that as well.
Well, I did watch the Japanese version, but all this sailed over my head because I had no idea about it. But that is one of the paradoxes of the film, isn't it? Because even though it was a massive international hit, it has undoubtedly done a lot to raise the profile of anime in mainstream Western theatrical exhibition in a way that arguably, nothing since Akira has. But I can see why that's happened. I think there are bits of it that are very universal, but there are also bits of it that are very, very, very culturally specific.
Yeah, it's amazing that, the last sort of major huge success from the anime was probably Spirited Away, properly big, like this was. Yeah. And that set off this entire fascination with anime. It's kind of a shame that it didn't happen here. We got little sort of pockets of humble sort of fantasy light anime, but it never really took off in the same way, which I think is a shame.
I think part of that is because the European side of things, not so much the British, but the European side of things, have a much stronger foundation in animation than the Americans do. And there are a lot of really gorgeous French, German, Spanish animations, even Italian stuff out there that has been around and they've been doing it for decades.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking about in the René Laloux show, where back in the 70s, he had to go to Czechoslovakia for his animators because there was just not a French industry that was capable of handling a film. And that's totally different now. France has a really impressive animation tradition.
Yeah, it's like Americans have to go to Korea to get their stuff done.
Yeah.
Which, nice little... but any closing thoughts on Your Name?
Yeah, I have plenty of thoughts, but I'll let Graham go first.
Yeah, I do think it is slightly over-convoluted, but I also think there are just parts of it that I missed, and the parts of it that are kind of obviously impressive, particularly the visual aspect of it is really strong and striking.
Yeah. I really liked it. It's just that sort of slow village speed, which you don't get. Yeah. I think there's a list on Letterboxd, a very successful list. I think it's relaxing cinema.
Oh, yeah.
Or something to that effect. And this is one of those movies where it's not particularly taxing, but it's full of sort of neat little character tics that I really, really like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also beautiful. It's just, you can't dispute that aspect of it.
Yeah. From my perspective, and in lieu of a review from all of those who've been asking me since this movie came out, the TLDR version of it, I may write one at some point. I don't know. Probably not. So don't hold your breath. In terms of production, absolutely gorgeous. It's stunning. It's one of Shinkai's best work. But in terms of his broader filmography, I think that Your Name is not as strong as Weathering With You in terms of it's more blatant in terms of its religious iconography than Weathering With You, which is a lot more subtle when it comes to the religious side of things. In terms of its relationships, I think that Garden of Words was much stronger in terms of just the dramatic tension between the characters. Whereas Your Name placed more emphasis on the mystery of how this was all happening and them kind of connecting with each other through notes and stuff like that. A lot of the relationship happened at arm's length, and there was this emphasis on, what's missing from your life. Whereas Garden of Words...
You could argue that that's a poke at the internet, really. Internet dating.
Yeah, you could argue that. Garden of Words was a lot more direct, and because it was a lot more direct, anytime you have a confrontation between between a couple of characters in any format, there's going to be interesting sparks flying. And Garden of Words, I thought, had that a lot more, even though Garden of Words is not as highly rated as Your Name. Yeah, exactly.
I wasn't laughing at that. I was thinking, if this is your too long didn't read version, what's yours?
I'm not going to go over his entire filmography, but one thing that I will say, Makoto Shinkai's first 2 films, She and Her Cat and Voices of a Distant Star. Now, She and Her Cat has, the echoes of that kind of have been, they've faded a little bit from his later works, but the echoes of Voices of a Distant Star still remain in a lot of his current works. That teen romance where you have something that separates the two, something, maybe it's an alien war on the other side of space, and the girl has to be a pilot in that war, and the boy has to remain on Earth, which is Voices of a Distant Star. Maybe it's, the girl is in a coma for however many years. Something separates the two, and they have to try and reconnect. 5 centimeters per second, I will say, is probably the most depressing of his works. But
I was just talking about Your Name.
Yeah,
this is such an awesomist podcast, isn't it?
Because this part comes at the end, Rob.
I'm just saying, Your Name in specific. Like I said, I can only look at it from the perspective of the other things he's done, and for me, Your Name it's like upper tier Makoto Shinkai, but I know that a lot of people say he is the next Miyazaki, and he's and there's him and Mamoru Hosoda and a few others who are being called the next Miyazaki, and I don't think that's a fair thing to apply to him, because he isn't Miyazaki. He has his own style, but I'm using the fact that people are calling him the next Miyazaki because of what comes next.
Yes, you could call him the next Miyazaki as in he's the next mainstream name, maybe.
Yeah,
to break through. But I don't think that's what people are really referring to.
No, I was using it as a segue for the next film.
But anyway, essentially, Your Name is a pretty good entry point to a director's work.
Yes, it is.
I would agree.
That's a too long didn't read version, Rob.
Ealing Studios, inspired creators of the fabulous Lavender Hill Mob, now joyfully embark upon the crest of yet another crime wave. Using this sweetly innocent old lady as a bewildered, unsuspecting decoy, the hilariously infamous Alec Guinness prepares a masterstroke of villainy that only he could conjure up and carry through with such demoniacal glee. No plot was ever hatched with such satanic cunning, as Guinness and his genial group of merry minstrels hit every high note in this delightfully different entertainment. True artists, every one of them.
Just taking a break from the Makoto Shinkai discussion with myself, Graham, and the other Rob from a year past to do a little bit of a podcast mid-roll. And we call this Directors Uncut the Random Chance Movie Podcast, but for a while it hasn't really been that, because as I've said many a time, we've got to essentially fill out the rest of the series with all of the shows that originally were born as Patreon exclusives. And we got one last Patreon exclusive to go. When I'm finished talking here, it'll cut straight to the clip where we tell you about the director, who, as luck would have it, is the episode coming out tomorrow. So if you want Directors Uncut and you are subscribed to our Patreon, you got a lot of Directors Uncut in the next couple of days. But before that, if you do want to keep up to date with everything, really, do subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. If you enjoyed this show so far, you can follow me on social media on Twitter @_RJ Simpson, or on Instagram @Directors Uncut Pod. And if you have anything you want to say about anything that we've discussed in any of the episodes that we've done this far, please do email me at directorsuncutpod@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to hear from you. Yes, just before we jump into that clip, I think there's 7 more Patreon exclusives to make the migration, including the one which is going live tomorrow. That'll have a very quick turnaround. But yes, the next 2 are going to be Robert Wise. Robert Wise is a journeyman in the best possible sense of the phrase. He's done everything from Star Trek The Motion Picture in the Andromeda Strain to West Side Story and The Sound of Music. And a particular favourite of mine is The Haunting, one of the great 1960s horror movies. And we're going to be following that up with Don Siegel. Don Siegel is, again, another sort of journeyman director in the sense of the traditional studio journeyman who did a little bit of everything. He did a lot of work with Clint Eastwood with the Dirty Harry movies. He did Escape from Alcatraz. And he's done an awful lot, really. Nothing quite as high profile as Robert Wise did, but he was a very busy director doing a lot of varied and interesting things from the 60s and 70s and 50s, actually. He got his career starts in 1945, stretches all the way to 1982, so there's a lot of things that we could have picked. Enough of that. I think it's time to hand over to a previous recording, where we're going to pick the very, very final Patreon exclusive. So, let's jump over to that, shall we? But we've got 381 directors, so the next director we're going to be doing, the next director will be number 102, who is, where are we, 102, who is Alexander McKendrick.
Name doesn't mean anything to me off the top of my head. Alexander McKendrick.
If I remember, I think it's the Lady Killers. He might be, yeah.
Oh, he was an Ealing comedy guy. Right, okay.
Well, that's the second one we've had after Robert Herman. But yeah, Lady Killers is a classic. I'll go to the hilt on that one. That should be interesting, I think. I mean, it's clear you two don't have a horse in this race.
No, I've never seen any of his films.
Same.
I take it 1952's Mandy isn't the original version of that thing with Nick Cage.
Well,
can you imagine a 1952 version of that Mandy?
Yeah, I don't know who'd play that role. Terry Thomas? That'd be different.
Oh, I'd watch that.
I don't know otherwise. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen anything by him, Lady Killers is one of those movies, like classic British movies, which I think anybody needs to really give a go. Beyond that, we'll see.
I'm sure I came here to meet you. I came from a different land named Agartha.
Agartha? A foreign country?
There was something I wanted to see and someone I had to meet. But now I've accomplished everything I wanted. I have no regrets. All I wish is for you to live.
This is the movie which we'd usually do first. Which is probably some body swapping joke that I never thought of, but let's just follow it.
Good. Yeah, workshop it a bit more when you've got the link there.
But A Journey of Agartha, A.K.A. The Children Who Chase Lost Voices, A.K.A. The Children Who Chase Lost Voices from the Deep.
From Deep Below,
Yes.
Which is also still not its original name, because the literal translation of the name, the Japanese name is Hoshiwa o Kodomo, which means children who chase stars.
Okay, so this is probably why it was not one of his more successful ones, wasn't it? Because no one knew what the hell it was called.
Well, there's that, and there's also just how so very, very different it is to pretty much everything else he'd done by that point. I mean, Children Who Chase Lost Voices. Right, he'd done She and Her Cat, he'd done Voices of a Distant Star, he'd done The Place Promised Down in Our Elders and 5 centimeters per second, and so he'd kind of established his thing for making films. Teen romances, at distance, separated by time, space, fantasy worlds, whatever. And then he did this.
This is basically Makoto Shinkare's Starman.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
kind of. The thing is, there's a reason why the film is the way it is.
But let's synopsize first. Let's attempt to synopsize.
Yeah, I'm sitting this one out. I think I did sterling work on the Your Name section of the show, and I'm just going to retire with grace.
There's it's an 11-year-old girl called Asuna.
12-year-old.
She lives seemingly alone. Her mother is nowhere to be seen. She's kind of just getting by in life. She goes home, she has a meal. She basically finds any reason not to go home early. And one day, in doing that, she happens... I can't remember, it's across a bridge, and there's an instance on the bridge where a weird bear-like creature Looks like a bear, but kind of isn't. It's kind of mystical and off, really. Blocks her on a train path. From that, a mystery guy comes up and saves her and rescues her. She kind of falls in love with him, let's be honest. And that is basically her introduction to this place that's referred to as the Underworld. Plot convolution here, plot convolution there. There's a teacher who is explaining sort of folklore, which I think is fantastic. Why don't we have classes in secondary school where they just teach us about ancient British folklore? That would have been brilliant, and I love that. But anyway, Occam's history teacher is there, and yes, what happens is some magical crystal gets involved after some... It's really hard to explain this because it's so incredibly convoluted at the top end of the movie.
Yeah.
There's a crystal, there's an interaction, there's a other force which is trying to get the crystal and get into the underworld, because in the underworld there's a gate between life and death, and one of the people who's in that group that's trying to get in is actually the history teacher. You never suggest that, would you? And from that, they're in this magical underworld with these monsters called Zoku, which try to kill anybody who's not from there, and an adventure and romance and a little dog cat thing called Mimi and stuff.
Right, okay, so I'm going to jump in here because Rob is really panicking now.
It's just there's so much going on. It's kind of hard to get it all
I'm going to jump in here, and first thing I'm going to say is this is not the backstory for the Dark Crystal, so just let's put that to one side.
It does have that 80s Jim Henson vibe, though, doesn't it? It absolutely does.
Yes, it does. There are several reasons for it being convoluted. Number one is that it's based on a children's story that Shinkai read when he was a kid, and that stuck with him. That didn't really coalesce into the idea of a film until 2008 when he was in England. And that's when the idea of the entire thing kind of coalesced into this film that he wanted to make. And I like the film from a certain perspective, but I also know that it's like heavily flawed. And probably his most flawed work. I would say this is kind of his sucker punch.
Oh, come on, that's not fair to him.
Come on, man.
And by that I mean it's the idea he had as a kid that he eventually got to make into
I was going to
film.
say, because at this point, Sucker Punch has a decent shout for being one of Zack Snyder's best films, which is very sad, honestly.
Yeah, I know. But that's the only link it's got to Sucker Punch. It's it's not, it's not that kind of film. It's not Sucker Punch at all. It just has a parallel in terms of he had the idea as a kid. So yeah, that's fine. But in terms of the rest of it, it's great on, it's great on the design. It's great on the animation. It really lacks in terms of the actual people, though. Except for the history teacher.
I don't know about that. I mean, I quite like Asuna as a character. She has that sort of very endearing naivety.
Yeah, this was one of the things when I was looking at what other people had said about this after I watched it. One of the places where I really differ from consensus. And I think part of that is because a lot of the reviews I saw of it on sites like Letterboxd were comparing it to Miyazaki. And I haven't seen much Miyazaki or Ghibli, so, it's not something that I was concerned about. But the common criticism seemed to be, the main character just doesn't grow. She doesn't develop as a result of going to this place. And I sort of thought, well, does she need to? Did Alice grow by going to Wonderland? I think there is a strain of children's literature. Well, literally, did. I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
But there is this strain of children's literature that I used to really like as a kid, which is anti-moralistic and is about the resilience of children and how they just adventure for the sake of it. And I think that rather than seeing this as failed Miyazaki, we should look at it as a contribution to that element of children's literature.
Yeah, it's kind of very much cut from the same cloth as Neverending Story in that era of 80s fantasy. Which is
one of the reasons why I can't. And it wasn't comparing it with Miyazaki that I found the characters to be a little bit flat. It was comparing it with things like Neverending Story and, adventure stories like that I found the characters to be a little bit flat. Asuna, yeah, fine. She's a reasonable enough lead character. But it seemed like everyone around her was kind of a washed-out version of a different character from somewhere else. Except for the history teacher, who seems like a more humane... and this is going to be an anime reference that Rob might get, but I know Graham is not going to. But he's more like a humane version of Gendo Ikari from Neon Genesis Evangelion in terms of his motivation, in terms of his goals, and what he's willing to do to achieve those goals. And by that I mean resurrect his dead wife. That's a spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Yeah, the F-set thing, I think that's the only way you can really... The mainland, whatever you want to call it, the surface dwellers. That part of the plot I wasn't really all that invested in. I actually found it quite dull, with nothing really unique or any sort of anything really. It's just sort of a bog standard, here is a girl going about her day. There's nothing to make it stand out in any way, shape or form, I felt.
But it gets out of that really quickly, doesn't it? I suppose that's another similarity with Your Name, which has the body swap thing come up immediately. And this similarly wastes very little time until its everyday small-town heroine is fighting a massive bear monster on a railway bridge, which, top marks. Can't say fairer than that.
But I quite like the fantasy underworld stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it has this thing which is probably quite close to Nausicaa, if you're going to draw like an anime reference. Hayao Miyazaki's a Nausicaa, in the sense of it's sort of classical fantasy, but with a point.
Yeah.
The point being sort of humans not understanding the history of the land and the ecology of the land and ruining it as a result.
Yeah. I think that's there. Yeah.
The thing is, you mentioned Nausicaa, and there are some very obvious Ghibli references in terms of how things look. The character designs, for example, aren't your typical Shinkai. They don't have that Shinkai look about them. They look very Ghibli-esque in terms of their design. Whereas you've seen Your Name, and hopefully you'll have looked at some other stuff by Shinkai. And his characters look different. And I know we're talking about animation. Sometimes it's difficult to see the difference between one director's work and another. But Miyazaki's characters tend to have a certain facial structure, let's say. That is very Miyazaki.
Well, I'd word it another way.
Character. Yeah, but
another way to word it, though. In his other movies, the characters kind of looked like they were trying to replicate real people.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, they're very much cartoon characters.
There's that. There's stuff that kind of is reminiscent of like Mononoke, Princess Mononoke, Asuna's cat, for example. You can draw parallels between that and Nausicaa's pet Tito. So there are parallels there.
Stuff like this, yeah.
Well, Nausicaa has that pet cat.
On her shoulder
as well. Yeah, exactly. So, there are these weird parallels you can draw between the two. And it is a much more Ghibli-esque movie than any of Shinkai's other works. But what I love about the film is that it's Shinkai stretching his stretching himself, testing his horizons, testing what he can do as a filmmaker, trying something completely different to stuff he's done before.
Yeah, just to go back to what we were talking about with Robert Wise, how his directors kind of tended, of that era, had this tendency to be all sorts of things. In Japan, you kind of get put in a box.
Yes, you do.
It's a cultural thing, but it's there. Because I remember Koreeda Hirakatsu also tried to break out of his box, because if you don't know, I'm hoping it comes up in this podcast, but if you don't know, his films are quite laid back. They're kind of
low-key, realist kind of films about people on the bottom rung of society, aren't they?
Yeah, and then he did The Third Murder, which was about a court case. A murder court case with Koji Yakusho, which is a very, very wild swing for the director, and I don't think it really worked, which...
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's a sort of a comment on the Japanese industry being a bit too short-sighted or not, but it kind of feels like it.
Yeah, I think it happens here plenty as well. I think you do see it. One thing that I do really like about this film, and that I can connect to some of the other paltry amount of anime that I've seen, is that it can do spectacle in a way that isn't about action. Yes. And I think that's really important. Like, I've seen Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell is obviously a completely different film to this, but the one thing that I would draw a comparison between is when there is an action scene in Ghost in the Shell, it's not necessarily a kind of kinetic action of the type you would get in a Hollywood movie. It's sometimes just something is destroyed in the background. And here, similarly, when the monsters appear, there's not really a sense that we should be excited because something's being smashed up. We're allowed to enjoy the strangeness and the presence of these monsters without it having to be that kind of traditional, the monsters come, now we're going to get some fighting scene. And I really appreciated that.
I mean, the closest you got really was a chase, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does have a great amount of tension because those things are relentless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are, I've mentioned the parallels with Ghibli, but there are ways in which it deviates wildly from Ghibli, and you've just mentioned one of them. The design of the monsters is very, very, very much a Shinkai perspective on how things should look. But
how would you describe them, though? I mean, for people if they haven't seen this.
There's that spiky. I don't know whether you call it a spiky creature, but the one with all the eyes at the end.
Yes,
for example.
They have a kind of a heraldic quality, I think. The emphasis is not so much on here is an animal that might exist and biologically function. It's more like here is a piece of strange art that is alive somehow. Yeah.
And that to me adds a layer of unreality to them. Yeah. I mean, when you look at something like Spirited Away, and you look at the design of the creatures in Spirited Away, a lot of them are based on Japanese folklore, or folklore from other countries, and so they have a degree of, okay, this is something that could be in folklore. This is something that you might see in folklore. Whereas I think you describing it as heraldic is actually quite accurate. If you look at, say, the England football T-shirt, the England football logo, you have the 3 lines, but they're very, very stretched out.
They're very stylized, yeah.
Now, that bear-type creature that Rob described at the beginning, very possible.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
There's one particular thing through the creature creation and creature ideas that I really, really liked. It's probably a lot in key with Buddhism and Shintoism, which is inescapable in this movie, really.
Yeah.
There's one creature sort of pivotal to the plot. It seems to be sort of the ferryman and the river Styx, essentially, for this area.
Yeah.
And it's going to die. And they say, it's making that noise. It's basically singing a song. And the noise it makes basically clings to everything.
Yeah.
As evidence that it lived, that its memories will live on forever. And I thought that's just a really nice touch, which...
Yeah.
It's just overlooked, I think, in sort of anime's search of bombastic noise.
You bring something else up, I think, that it really differentiates this from Your Name, is that while, yes, there is a lot of Buddhist referencing in it, you can also describe the creatures with reference to Greek mythology, as you just did. There are several creatures that are drawn directly from Aztec art. It is a much broader field of reference than the kind of almost anthropological look at small-town Shintoism that you have in Your Name.
Yeah.
But just to relate it to Miyazaki, I think that's a great shame. Because people didn't like this because Miyazaki did this thing first. That's incredibly short-sighted, because I think there's so many original ideas in here which I don't think anybody's really touched. Like a pure Shintoist sort of allegory about accepting death, which is what this is. When you break it all down, it's about accepting death and it's about moving on.
Yeah.
I don't think Miyazaki in any of his films really had the bottle to do that. And this is also a kids' movie.
I'm trying to think. I don't think... No, there's not one of Miyazaki's films that is all about accepting death.
Which is going back to that sort of 80s idea of fantasy, of a kiddie horror, or whatever you want to call it, where in that era, it didn't treat kids as something to be placated. It taught them, it treated them as somebody to tell these fables, tell these stories, and give these messages to.
Yeah.
And this is very much of that tradition. And for it to be sort of shunned because Miyazaki did this first, lol, 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 I think is just a huge shame, really.
Yeah, I think in terms of the in terms of the anime viewing community, I think for the most part the anime viewing community don't really look at it like that. I think that's more of a general
Twitter kind of
but even
in terms
so,
of the anime,
people do see it like that. That's what I mean.
I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not saying that they don't at all. I'm just saying that in terms of the anime community, they probably look at it more from the perspective of they expect a certain type of film from Makoto Shinkai, and this isn't it. So that's basically from that perspective.
So get in your box and stay in your box. Dance, monkey, dance.
Kind of thing, yeah. And again, this is one of the reasons why I applaud him for doing this film. I applaud him for having the courage to do it. I wish he'd stuck to his guns more when he was making it, because when it comes to, like I said, when it comes to the design of things, he's really pushed himself when it comes to the actual monsters, and he's really pushed himself in terms of the design of the world. It's just I would have liked to have seen his trademark character design as well.
That's understandable.
And that for me would have really sealed this. And I think maybe it would have been more accepted.
I mean, it's really interesting when directors sort of break out of their perceived box, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I'm not a big fan of it, but I do think it's very interesting. But Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water, that's not a typical del Toro movie.
Completely, yeah. And yet it's still got his character in it, hasn't it? I think if you are that good, you can move out of your comfort zone and still have people say, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's obviously a romance from the director of Hellboy. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Okay. So closing thoughts on this movie with all of the names before we talk about Makoto Shinkai as a whole.
I wrote a review on this, and initially when I wrote that review, I was trying to put this movie into, trying to find where this movie actually fit kind of in the broader spectrum of animated movies, that sort of thing. And so I started off, I'm just going to read what I wrote. This
is going to start with the first Japanese person to draw a picture, isn't it?
No. Listen, just initially I started off with stories about the dead coming back to life, dime a dozen, blah, blah, blah. Rarely do we see tales that are more akin to the legends of old. Mighty heroes braving perils of the underworld to be reunited with their lost love. Sorry, that should be a 12-year-old girl. Let's try this again. Stories about children having adventures in other worlds, dime a dozen, blah, blah, blah. More akin to legends of old, brave youths traverse through other realms on a journey that would teach them lots of stuff. Nope, that's not going to work either. Let's try putting the two of them together, which is essentially what he's done. He's taken something old and something different and smashed the two together to create this. And that's basically what it is. It is a 12-year-old girl doing what Hercules did, journeying into the underworld on a mission to save stuff and learn stuff.
Yeah. And in some ways, while I am cognizant of the flaws that have been brought up about it, in some ways I do like it more than Your Name. It is a very pure, very anarchistic kind of fantasy of the type that I really enjoyed watching and reading when I was younger, and I wish I had seen this when I was a kid. I think it is part of a school of fantasy that, yes, has deeper messages, yes, has morals to learn, but is also not resistant to just showing you wonderful things, and I think that's really important.
And you've also joined my school of not thinking Your Name is the greatest Makoto Shinkai work ever.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to Makoto Shinkai, what our feelings of him off the back of these two?
Well, it's hard for me to really draw a conclusion beyond what I've done. I do get the sense that Your Name is probably the more typical one, and even though it wasn't my favourite, I do appreciate that he is using animation in a way that Westerners don't usually. He's using animation as a way of just telling a small story about people, which, is absolutely something that should be done.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think Shinkai is one of those directors who it's not that difficult to put him into a category, but it's difficult to kind of keep him in that category. I think Mamoru Hosoda is one of those ones who is a lot more difficult to pin into a category in the first place. But I think Shinkai is one of those ones who's always kind of railing at the boundaries that are placed on him, which is one of the reasons why he puts so much religious iconography, subtly or overtly, into his films. Part of it is because there's a part of him that I feel from his works, and I felt it more especially in his later works like Your Name and Weathering With You, that wants to go back to what he did with Children Who Chase Lost Voices, and basically do something that really swings for the fences, that really tests him, that really challenges what people think of him. As a director, he wants to, and I constantly get the feeling that he wants to do something truly fantastic, something that that is beyond what we think his scope is.
And I'll be there when he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I really like about him, I'll keep this kind of brief, is kind of very contrary to what contemporary anime is.
Yeah.
Contemporary anime is hedonistic, it's naive, it's targeted towards an audience who value waifus and merchandise more than stories and anything of substance. And I think a director who can put like Buddhist and Shintoist sort of methodology and ideas and beliefs into fairly normal movies deserves more plaudits than he's probably getting.
I'm just going to jump in there and just jump in there just a little bit and just say that is like 80% of anime, but not all of anime.
That's still described. A big percentage, though. 80, isn't it?
80. Well, the thing is, 80% of anime that people are aware of. Let's say there's a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
I'm going to judge this, right, Graham? This is an anime name. Do you think it's a cool scene or an uncool scene? Is it okay to pick up girls in dungeons?
Yes. I wouldn't say that's not yes answering that question. That's
that is the title of anime.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like picking them up is not the problem you're having.
Yeah,
I never expected that answer, but
I'm not going to challenge that. I do think that is an awful name, and I'm not a fan of the series either. But also there are shows like Made in Abyss, which are completely different to the normal type of thing. I was going to reference Maria Carter because I do think that she's a director that really needs more attention.
Does a cool scene need love pillows? There you go.
No.
I think...
ideally, if anything, you'd go the opposite way. You'd make it cooler by removing them.
Yes, you would.
Yes, you would. But
and if you don't know what a love pillow is, don't Google it. Stop. Just stop.
Yeah, don't Google it. Stop. And all I'm going to say is, the moment I see a Gundam love pillow, I'm out. Because you're taking it too far, anime fans. Taking it too far.
Merci. N'ayez crainte. La comète est le signe que le Seigneur nous protège. La peste ne touchera pas Pesha. Jésus m'a promis, à moi son épouse, que cette ville sera épargnée.
Seigneur Jésus, protégez-nous. Protégez notre cité. Merci, Seigneur Jésus.
Nous savons que tu es ici avec nous.
And following up at the back end of the show, away from the featured director, who this week is Makoto Shinkai, I've been joined by Oliver. Hello there.
Hi. God, I'm so sorry. I had it on mute. I didn't realize you can do that.
Completely adding, Rob. A bit of audio verity. Yeah.
Completely crossing the streams here. Graham too.
Hello there.
Who was on the first half of this show, which must have been recorded, I don't know, about July, August 2021, something like that.
Yep. I learned a lot about anime doing this show, and since then I have forgotten all of it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of it, Graham. Let's be honest. So this part of the show, it's completely divorced from anything that we watched previously on the episode. It's just about other stuff we've been watching. The good, the bad, the ugly, whether it's TV, whether it's a podcast. Might be listening to a podcast that you really want to talk about, whether you've been on it or it's just a good podcast. They do exist, and there's a lot of them out there. Let's just open the floor to both Oliver and Graham. Who wants to go first with what else you have been watching?
Yeah, I recently watched Rancho Notorious, a 1952 Western by Fritz Lang, starring Marlene Dietrich and a load of other people who aren't Marlene Dietrich, so I don't care.
Well, you're suggesting an awkward film there for her to be all the characters.
Yeah, it's basically like Anomalisa, but for Marlene Dietrich. No, it isn't like that at all. No, the film is uninterested in parts of the plot that aren't directly Dietrich related. It starts off with Arthur Kennedy as a straight arrow gunman whose wife is murdered. He goes looking for the outlaws who did it. And as I started watching it, I thought, this is kind of weirdly paced. It's skipping over a lot of bits of the chase that you'd imagine another Western would take time to flesh out. And that's because it is in a hurry to get to the bit with Marlene Dietrich as a saloon owner who holds the key to the mystery of where these outlaws are. It shares a common strand with a lot of other Dietrich Westerns. I'm thinking particularly of the spoilers here with Marlene Dietrich and John Wayne. It shares a characteristic with the spoilers, which is that every single line of dialogue Dietrich has is an innuendo about something. She is introduced playing a bar game where she sort of, her and a bunch of the other saloon girls sit on the drinkers' backs and they sort of ride them up and down the pub like horses to see who can do it the fastest. A scene which I suspect is only included so they can say that in the first scene that she appears in, Marlene Dietrich is seen riding some guy. And it really gets just more Carry On West from here onwards, really. Dietrich has a big musical number which is called Get Away Young Man, a sentiment that I refuse to believe has ever passed Marlene Dietrich's lips before this film was made. It's not Lang's most resonant work, but it is still a Fritz Lang film. It looks gorgeous, is very entertaining, and yeah, Marlene Dietrich.
That's what I absolutely love about Fritz Lang, I'll be honest. I think he is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And I think that because as well as sort of inventing like cinematic language in silent movies, he wasn't afraid to get silly.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
He never took himself very seriously whatsoever, and I think that just elevates him in my mind.
Yeah, I think I've seen some great Fritz Lang films, and I've seen some Fritz Lang films that I wasn't as keen on, but I don't think I have ever or will ever see a Fritz Lang film that isn't entertaining.
Yeah. And there's some greatest of all times who were awfully worthy, and I don't think you could ever lay that accusation at his doorstep. I love the guy.
Yeah.
Oliver, you frowning there? You disagree with that?
No, I actually, I've actually never seen a single Fritz Lang film, so which don't know how that's happened really, but
never a bad time to watch Metropolis, I would say.
No, well, they actually played that in I live in Nottingham, and they had the sort of, there's like a Broadway cinema, like sort of the independent one here. They played it with a live band a few weeks ago. And I was tempted to go, but I listened to the band and it was kind of like proggy rock, which is it's not really my thing. I don't think I could sit 2.5 hours of like proggy rock and then like silent film. I thought it would just be a bit too much on a Friday night as well after work. I thought it was just a bit. So
I don't think it'd fit though. It is in key with the movie, but yeah, if you don't like that sort of music, it's a bit.
Yeah.
Annoying,
well, I mean, it would have been good. To be honest with you, I think I was just a bit a bit scared to go to see a 2.5 hour silent film at the cinema.
Wrong movie at the wrong time, yeah.
Yeah, you can't escape at that point. So you're kind of forced to. It's probably the best time to watch a silent film though, because then you haven't got like. I feel like sometimes you watch a silent film and you get about halfway through and you're kind of like, oh god, like they're not talking anymore.
Yeah, it's easy to get distracted sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I don't think Metropolis is one of about 4, which doesn't have that problem. I think.
Yeah, I will watch it. I've made like a list of like silent films to watch, and there's probably about 6 Fritz Lang films in there. But it's kind of like
it's one of 4 that isn't a Buster Keaton movie. I'll just qualify that, by the way.
Yeah, I actually saw Buster Keaton one for the first time a few months ago, and I can't remember which one it was now. It was Sherlock Jr. It was very good.
Oh yes,
but I didn't watch it recently, so I won't talk about it too much. But yeah, I was gonna actually talking about silly directors. I watched on Friday Benedetta, the new Paul Verhoeven film.
He's not silly. Well, he's kind of a he
is silly.
Come on.
He's very silly.
He's very silly and very serious.
Yes. Yeah. Well, when I say silly, I mean I don't think he's not afraid to like make fun of whatever he's making a film about.
Oh no, he made Showgirls. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well, I saw that as well for the first time, but I wasn't going to talk about it too much, but I kind of watched that in preparation because I actually reviewed Benedetta for a website, another website, and I thought I hadn't seen Showgirls and it was on movie, and I thought, well, give it a watch. But yeah, Benedetta is actually quite similar to Showgirls in the way that it kind of takes this these group of people, like in Showgirls and strippers and stuff, and in this one it's nuns, but it kind of turns it into this sort of like melodrama. It's very over the top, dramatic. It's actually really funny. Like me and my girlfriend went to go see it, and we were laughing like every 10-20 minutes there was a joke, but like not like a sort of quippy sort of like meta like winking at you joke. Like it was just funny. Like it was just written so well that the things that like the characters were doing and like there was I can't remember what the exact scene was, but they would. Like someone would like fall over, and the other nun would just like pull this like fun, like weird like face, and like it was just funny because of the timing and the setting and like the 1700s. Like it's just funny, and it was very like like I don't know if either of you seen Hard to Be a God, that the Russian film.
You never forget that.
Yeah, it's not as gloopy as that, but it kind of had that sort of like medieval, but kind of like it's all a bit like I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of gave me a sort of
the griminess of
yeah, like a sleazy like medieval film, which I don't think you get many of anymore. So I really liked it. I thought it was really great. I admittedly haven't seen an awful amount of his films, maybe 4 or 5 now, but it was really good. I'd recommend it to anyone. It's just enjoyable. Like it wasn't I'm not like it's not the greatest film of all time or anything, but it was just a lot of fun. Especially in the cinema, like a lot of people were laughing, and actually an older woman like walked out of the film. Like she just got up and left. Like I had like half an hour left, and she just walked out. Just like, oh, see you then. I was like, oh, maybe she's gone to the toilet, and then she just like didn't come back. And I was like, I'm not surprised.
Wow. Some people have sensitive. I know this is sort of Paul Verhoeven. He's got a lot more salacious in his older age, hasn't he? And a lot more fearless in what he puts on screen.
Yeah, and
he was never unfearless, but he's just sort of kept it even, which is amazing.
Yeah, he hasn't mellowed, I think, is the thing.
No, definitely not. Which I was on his Wikipedia page. I was writing this thing, and I saw that he was 83 years old, and I was just like, bloody hell, 80. Wow. He made this film. Maybe if it was made like I guess like 2 years ago, he was in his 80s when he made this film. Just like blows my mind that an 80-year-old not only made this film, but made this film that is about lesbian nuns. Like, and it isn't afraid to like show anything. It's just like I don't know how many directors would have the sort of guts to make a film like that anyway.
There's so many anecdotes about him saying I can't remember it precisely, but there was some actor that didn't want to be nude in his movie, So he did it before them. He just showed, just like this, do it like this, and he got nude himself. And got all flapping about. Like, he just does not care what anybody thinks about him whatsoever. Paul Verhoeven, you might not like his movies, but I love the man. He's just one of those, like John Waters. He's just pure charisma as a person.
Yeah, he's very funny. But yeah, that was great. I watched that one.
I haven't got many because I've been in the podcast recording cycle, but the one I will talk about is one I wanted to see for a while. I think it was off the back of Woodland's Dark and Days Bewitched. Great documentary, by the way. Probably would have been better served as a mini-series rather than a 4-hour through documentary about folk horror.
Yeah, I think the line between film and mini-series gets a bit blurred when you go over the 3-hour mark, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's great, but it's not a movie. It's a mini-series. But Eyes of Fire.
Ah, yes.
I think it's a 1983 movie, folk horror. Let's not dance around it. It's The Witch.
Yeah.
It is Robert Eggers' The Witch. It's about how a group of pilgrims in the very early areas of American experience, when they're still in Civil War, when they're still fighting amongst the natives, and it's very much America, not a European white country, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's about a bunch of pilgrims who are chased from their home by religious fundamentalists, we'll call them, basically. And they go out and hide in the woods because people are chasing them, because the natives are chasing them, because the people from their village are chasing them, and they find this little valley, which appears to be quite idyllic and nice and lovely, but it's not. It's basically this little area where nobody wants to go because effectively the ghosts have become quite icky and mucky and will take down anybody who is with them, or in that area, I should say. And it's interesting, but I think it's one of these movies. The ideas are great. It talks about the ghosts of America as literal icky, gunge throwing up beasts. It has mud people. It has all of these things, and it's all sort of subtextually relevant and interesting. But I think I talked about this before. I think it was with House, the movie, not the Japanese one, the American one. Paul Miner, I think it was, who did that. There's bits in there where when they're still, it looks absolutely stunning. But as soon as you put it into motion, it just looks very, very silly, like a guy in a big rubber suit.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Eyes of Fire is the same. It does look a lot like that, but at the same time, I think a lot of it will be masked over by it being shot at night. I think any horror movie which is shot during the day or takes place during the day, I know people love Midsummer, but I don't. But generally speaking, horror movies that take place during the day, they have to be a bit more insidious. When it's creature-ridden, it's creature-driven, I should say, and effects-driven. You see the stitching, you see the joints, and I think it exposes it in a way which I think Eyes of Fire deserves better than, really.
Yeah, I watched this for the first time as part of Letterboxd's Horror Challenge back in October, and I sort of agree with you. I think there are bits of it that are clunky, but in a strange way, they kind of add to it. It has this sense that it's not quite in control of all of its subtext in ways that a modern folk horror often is. I think it has a nice kind of outsider artish feeling that I enjoyed a lot.
It's very chaotic, and I do like it, but it's just a shame when you just see this one little ingredient where you think if you just did that, I think you'd be onto an absolute winner. And it's been shot during the day.
Yeah.
It just exposes it as people in weird rubber outfits, like throwing up gunge. Which, if you've got a quick quirk, I guess, why not?
Yeah, that's how I spend my weekends.
And that's all I have, unfortunately. I was on Shudder. I watched that. Which there's another one. I think it's Alison's Birthday. It's another one from that documentary.
I don't know that one.
Australian folk horror. And the prince there is quite crummy, but it's one of these very, very rare movies. You do get them every now and again where it's like this complete amazing discovery. I think the last one for me was Next of Kin, which divides opinion quite a lot, but
it's great.
This one is of that ilk, I think, Alison's Birthday.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, this one's 10 days ago now, but I bring it up because it's great, and I lot of excuse to our French films, even though I've gotten the impression that Rob doesn't seem to like French films, but
No, not really.
I do actually really like French films. So
Me too.
So I saw this story. Well, the French name is History de Marie et Julien. I think it's the English translation is a story of Marie and Julien.
Rivette, right?
Yes, Jacques Rivette, who is probably my favorite director. I think I'm confident of saying that he's claimed that spot. This is one of his last films he made before he died. I think it's his third last one. And it's a sort of horror. I don't know if either of you have seen Personal Shopper by Olivier Assayas.
Graham's right there. He's mad for him. Of course he has.
Did you like? I don't know if you like that film, but
I adore. I'm a big fan of Assayas in general, and Personal Shopper is one of my favourite things he's done.
Yes, it's a great film, and this kind of reminded me. I think I would be surprised if he didn't find this film, the Rivette film, as a sort of inspiration, because it's kind of this sort of weird like ghost story. But is it a ghost story? Is it not? I don't know how many Rivette films either of you have seen, but his films are obviously very much one. Yeah, we're all pretty similar to. In some ways, they're all sort of play on these ideas of like, oh, there's an assassination plot, but is there really? And even if there isn't, does it really matter? And this sort of like these like Hollywood sort of like genre tropes of like noir and horror and fantasy, but then they kind of like fade away and they become less important as the film goes on. And it's very much in the kind of I guess it's really maybe one of his only actual like horror films. People listening to this can't see that, but I did quotation marks for that. But it's a sort of horror. It's not scary, but it's kind of covers the grounds of like loss and grief, but like not in like a corny way. I thought it was really great, and it has Emmanuel Burton. Is that how you say it? Emmanuel Burton.
I don't know how to pronounce it, but I know who you mean.
Yes, and she's great. And it's not quite The Beautiful Troublemaker where she's being painted in a Jacques Rivette film, but it's if anyone's seen that one, but it's very good. I liked it a lot. And he's one of my favorite directors, so it's definitely a shout out that.
The Pont du Nord was the one I've seen, and it just sent me to sleep. I'm very sorry.
Oh yes, I like that one a lot as well. So that's got I can't say her name, but his Bulia Olga, I think, or something, and her daughter as well. Actually, they're both in it. That's an interesting film because I think that's the first one he made. He had like a mental breakdown in the 70s, I think, and I think that was the first film he made after. It's a very weird film.
It sounds riveting.
Oh, come on, Graham.
That's it for that one. So
I'm going to keep things French, I think, because we recently got Arrow Video's second box set of Claude Chabrol thrillers that they've released this year. I don't quite know why Arrow have suddenly gone all in on Chabrol, but I'm rather glad they have. He's one of the few major French directors of that generation who I wasn't much familiar with before. I think I'd seen one of the later ones, A Girl Cut in Two, but that was it.
I've not seen any Chabrol films, I have to admit. He's one of the French directors I haven't seen a single thing from.
Yeah, no, I like I say, I knew very little about him other than his general reputation that he made kind of Hitchcockian kind of thrillers, which is not unfair, but I think there's more tonal diversity to him than that. And the film in the new box set that I was most taken by was a film I hadn't heard of before from 1999 called The Colour of Lies, which stars Sandrine Bonnaire as the wife of a school teacher who's put under a degree of suspicion when one of his students turns up dead. And there's a scene early on of them finding the kid's body, and it's very dreamlike without making a big meal out of being dreamlike. It's like it depicts the people who discover the body as being shocked in a way that is so far from melodrama that you wonder if they're quite tuned into the gravity of the situation. It's very hard to describe. And the story takes a lot of tonal wanderings it is a very dark story. You know, it is about the murder of a child, but there's also a strain of almost absurd humour in it that reminded me of how David Lynch mixes this stuff into Twin Peaks, into the early episodes of Twin Peaks when it's still pretending to be some sort of murder mystery. It has a couple of supporting performances that I think are really worth paying attention to. It's got Valeria Bruni Tedeschi, who's a regular in Francois Ozon's films, who I have a lot of time for her.
You are so good at pronunciation, by the way, Graham. You did that so
I don't know if I'm
effortlessly.
getting this right. I'm just being ill-informed with confidence.
Fair enough.
But Tedeschi's great, I think, and she plays the inspector charged with looking into it, and she's interestingly hard to read. It's like anyone else would make the police officer a type. You know, maybe she's a hard-nosed investigator who's going to crack the case. Maybe she's a bungler who's getting the wrong end of the stick. Maybe she's out of her depth. Maybe she's a veteran. But in this case, it seems to change from scene to scene. The only constant is that she seems like a very level-headed, reasonable person. And that's quite unsettling, because she's put up against our hero. She suspects him. And because someone so sensible appears to suspect him, you find yourself thinking, despite everything you've seen, maybe he is guilty. It has a little DNA in common with The Hunt, you know, the Thomas Vinterberg film with Mads Mikkelsen.
Very good movie, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that too. It's like that, but it's more novelistic, I guess. The Hunt is a very good straight-ahead thriller, and coming from someone like Chabrol, who, as I say, has a reputation for doing straight-ahead thrillers, you might think this would be the same, but it's not quite the case. It has a broader scope, and in a way that's really rewarding. Not least of the digressions is a pretentious Bernard-Henri Levy-style local intellectual who maintains 3 separate newspaper columns in 3 politically opposed papers because he thinks it makes him neutral. Played by Antoine Decaune, who...
It's a familiar name.
Anyone who had a misspent youth in the 90s, I think, will remember him as the host of Channel 4's Eurotrash. But quite a well-regarded actor in France, and he is, I mean this in the best way possible, wonderfully oily in this. Like, if you do remember him mainly for presenting cheap VT items about German naturists, then it's not entirely inappropriate. He is that kind of a huckster in a lot of ways in this movie.
Just touching upon the Chabrol, I'm doing the other half of the box set. I've only managed to catch one in the movies yet. It's called The Flower of Evil.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of like a perfect example of what I dislike about French movies, to be completely blunt about it. It's got that name, but what it actually is... it's about an upper middle class French family. The mother is she's trying to get into office for the local Bordeaux council, I think it is. And her husband is a chemist who is very, very handsy with anybody who basically looks at him.
Yes.
And also in the family is their aunt Line. I'm assuming it's Line. I don't know French. It's another language to me. Come on, in a very, very complex way. I mean, and also in that family are a half brother and half sister who are basically knocking boots on the side.
Right.
And in that, there's a letter that might basically end the political aspirations of the wife, and it essentially is about finding out who wrote that letter, but it doesn't really play out that way. There's lots of conversations, there's lots of bits about the family and not liking the parents and the complicated interrelationships, and it feels like a stage play.
Yeah.
It's like 99% a stage play until it gets about, it's about an hour and 50 minutes. It gets about an hour and 35 the way through it. It suddenly decides to have something happen. And then it becomes interesting. But the other Chabrol movies, I can't remember the name of it. I think it was
Inspector Lavardin, the Inspector Lavardin films.
Them two really, really interesting entries into the Inspector, like character inspector movies or character inspector TV shows. But yeah, I've not got a lot of experience with Chabrol either.
So, Moving Country. Actually, don't know how you say his name correctly. Chinese director. Is it Zhang Yimou? Don't know how you say that. Yang Yimou? I don't know how you say it.
It's just Zhang Yimou.
Yeah.
There's lots of. It's easy enough to say it's when you start getting NGs next to each other where it gets complicated.
Yeah. So the guy that did House of Flying Daggers.
Yes. Yeah.
Hero. So I watched his first film, Red Sorghum, the other day. Actually, yes, 2 days ago. It's the most recent thing I watched. And yeah, it was really great. Actually, I've been meaning to watch his films for a long time because I really want to watch Razor Red Lantern, which I haven't seen yet. But I wanted to sort of go back and watch them in sort of some sort of like chronological order. And this is his first one. And it's great. There's not a crazy amount of plot. It's basically about a peasant woman who gets sold into a marriage with a wealthy wine distillery owner who also has leprosy, and he dies and she takes over, and then eventually the Japanese invade as part of the I think it's the second Sino-Japan War, or is it Sino-China War? I can't remember. Sino-Japan.
Please don't look at us for confirmation. Asian history is a massive blind spot for me, I'm afraid.
I think it's a Sino-Japan War. I think it's Sino.
Yeah, Japan and China have had many wars. I don't know how many.
It's the second one of that, I think, and it's the one. I think it was just before World War II.
Yeah, that's the major one, which was sort of around the same time as World War II. Yeah, there's a lot of movies about that, and it was very, very nasty time of history.
Yes, yeah, and it becomes it's not exactly a nice film the whole way through, but once the Japanese invade, it becomes a very hard-hitting film. But the plot isn't really that important. It's more about how it's filmed, and I think the director Zhang Yimou was a cinematographer before he was a director.
That makes sense, yeah.
Which you could sort of very easily tell when you watch it. Reminded me a lot of Terrence Malick in the way that it captures like nature, especially sort of his more like Days of Heaven, Thin Red Line, sort of these like shots of like these like they're not wheat, but it's kind of like like wheat fields and like people lying in the grass and like people's faces and lots of red, strong colours. It's absolutely stunning. It's a great looking film. As I said, it kind of reminded me of Malick, and it doesn't really need a plot. It just kind of has these like a very basic plot, but some really nice visuals. And Gong Li is in it. It's her sort of I think they were known as for like collaborations together. I think it's her first ever film.
She's great, yeah.
Yes, yeah. She's great in it. She's really good. Her facial expressions are so good because she doesn't actually have that much dialogue because there isn't much dialogue in the film at all. But her face expressions are very crucial, I think, to the emotions of the film, and using the face expressions and like the use of colours, it tells a story quite well without having to sort of really say anything, which is I always appreciate with the film. So yeah, it's actually on YouTube as well. So I found
a miraculous amount of weird things on YouTube I found. Yeah,
it's a good quality as well on YouTube. So with subtitles. So I definitely recommend it, and I'm gonna absolutely watch some more of his films actually. So I'm definitely gonna hopefully next time I come on this, I'll have I'll have another one to speak about. So
to take us out, Graham, what else have you got?
I wasn't ready for anything else, to be honest. I've what else have I watched?
We're talking about Taskmaster for 5 minutes again.
Like we did last time.
That's okay if you've not got anything else. I think that'll take us out then with what we have been watching recently. Coming up soon, like I mentioned earlier in the show, we've got Robert Wise, Don Siegel, and Nicholas Meyer are the next 3 Patreon exclusive episodes to come out after this one. I don't know the timeline because it gets complex.
Complex, ever-changing world. Who knows where we'll be in a month or so's time. Yeah.
Yes, and the Don Siegel episode has seagulls in the background, so he really committed to that episode.
It's appropriate. Don Siegel.
Yes. So, Graham, where else can we find you and your stuff online?
Well, obviously, I'm a writer for thegeekshow.co.uk, where I run the weekly podcast Pop Screen about pop stars in the movies. I am a writer for Horrified, the British horror website. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Graham W. Film, and I'm on Letterboxd just as Graham Williamson.
Excellent. And Oliver?
Yeah, I also write for Geek Show and also a few other places. I'm on Twitter at Mutilation Wave and Letterboxd Oliver X Parker. And yeah, that's it for now.
Excellent. And I have been Rob Simpson, and that has been another episode of Directors Uncut.